We really appreciate our sponsors. And we have Bob Grenier in the studio with us again, the current mayor of Tavares. Hi, Bob.
Hi, Kelly. How are you today?
Great. We're so glad to have you along.
Thanks.
And we have a special guest, Don Campbell.
Hello.
Hi, Don. We're so glad to have him. Don, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm originally from Indiana, moved down to Florida about 35 years ago, and live in Tavares. Actually, you and I met many years ago doing theater.
Yes, we did.
In Leesburg, and I have a full-time job doing IT service in the daytime, but I still do acting both volunteer and professionally, and I think my professional job is kind of why I'm here. So.
Yes.
Oh, I love seeing you. What was that? I saw you in Maine. What was that? What did I see you in?
Hello, Dolly.
Hello, Dolly. Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, Dolly. That was wonderful. Dolly's House Theater.
Right, and of course, Bob and I have been very, very close friends for 25 years or so now.
Years.
Doing lots of history together. So.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
My right hand, he keeps me in check,
Great. That's so great. That's wonderful. So, Don, tell us what you do.
So I portray Captain Edward John Smith of the Titanic at the Titanic dinner gala at Titanic, the artifact exhibition down on International Drive. The Titanic museum there, the Titanic exhibition, is run by RMS Titanic Incorporated. They are the official salvors in possession of the Titanic. They're the only ones who can legally bring artifacts back up from the Titanic.
Oh, wow.
And their charter and their contract with the world, if you will, is that anything they bring up, it's not for sale. It's not. They can't make money off of it. Their job is to educate. So everything they bring up goes into museums or traveling exhibitions. They have two permanent museums, one here in Orlando down on International Drive, and the other one is in the Luxor out in Las Vegas.
Okay.
And then they have, at any given time, 3 or 4 traveling exhibits. So there's one in Columbus right now. There's one over in Germany. There's one getting ready to start open up in Boston. And the idea is to bring these artifacts to the public, let you see them, let you learn from them. In some cases, touch them. To have the opportunity to actually touch a piece of Titanic is really quite an experience.
Yes. I actually got to go to Tampa one time when it was traveling through Tampa. That was many years ago. My kids were very small then. I think they were 8, 10, and 15, something like that when we went.
So on Friday and Saturday nights, we do a dinner show at the museum called the Titanic Dinner Gala. There were rumors at the time that Smith was going to retire after the maiden voyage of the Titanic, and so we used that to have a surprise retirement dinner for the captain that takes place on that Sunday, and you get to meet and interact with several of the more famous passengers: Molly Brown, Dorothy Gibson, Thomas Andrews, the designer, the captain, of course, Bruce Ismay, in a very fun and hopefully very poignant at times, where you can really learn and get to see the characters. And so I play Captain Smith.
How about the toast? Can you recite the toast for us? Why did I put them on the spot? I know the captain gives a toast.
Well, we were going to talk about the captain's career, so you're going to take away all my notes here. I just run through
Very
it.
good. Okay.
So there is a point in the dinner where the captain is asked to talk about his career and just give a brief synopsis of his career. So,
okay. Well, that sounds wonderful. I'm going to have to get over there.
Yeah, and the thing is, you do bear a great resemblance to him, and pictures could be deceiving because actually he was actually built like you. I mean, you were actually went into this role not just with your looks, but you actually greatly resembled the captain in many ways.
I joke with people that's how I got the job, because I looked like him already and I saved on makeup. So.
And well, how lucky, fortunate, because of your theatrical background as well, that they had someone there. And actually, it kind of stumbled on it from Hello Dolly. Wasn't one of the actresses who performed at the Titanic also in Hello Dolly?
She was, yes, yeah, Moran, and she plays Dorothy Gibson in the shows down there. So and it didn't hurt. I had always had a fascination with Titanic. I mean, Titanic's always been one of those things, and I think for everybody, it's a story that absolutely resonates. And one of the things about the story of Titanic is you can have, in history, you can have any kind of a focus you want and find an inspiration for that in Titanic. If you are, and it doesn't even have to be history; it can be current events. If you are into the environment and saying the study of the area around the wreckage and the life that they have discovered down there at 2.5 miles below the surface is amazing. If you're into sociology and you want to get a good time capsule of the Gilded Age, the end of the Gilded Age, the Edwardian period, Titanic is your classroom for that. You want to learn about fashion at the time, the dresses, the papers, everything. I mean,
I have to tell you, last year I had, I would say it was this year, but it was last school year. We had a group of students. I found out about National History Day. And that's a thing where students can put together a project about history and compete. And I found out they could do it through drama. So I got really excited and I presented it to my kids. And 4 of my kids wanted to do this project. And so I said, well, you guys have to pick what you want to do. The theme is turning points in history. And they said, well, we want to do the Titanic. And I said, well, is that a turning point? And they went, oh. I said, well, I'm asking a question. I'm not saying it isn't, but you have to figure it out. Well, they got busy looking and they said, it is. It's a turning point in safety, maritime safety.
Absolutely.
So that's the angle that they went at. And they wrote this little skit. And we had Molly Brown. I'm trying to remember the other girl's name. She was a nurse, and she was also in several wrecks besides the Titanic.
Violet Jessup.
Violet, that's it.
Yeah.
And then we had a boy play Astor, J.J. Astor, and then we had the captain.
Yeah.
And so I'll have to show you the pictures later. It was really cute. They did a great job, and we called the state right after they decided they wanted to do it, knowing it was in May. And this was February, and they said, well, that's great that you want to do it, but you have to compete at the county, and that's in 2 weeks. And these kids have been working on it all year, and I said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to go. Don't focus on winning. Just go. Have a good time that you get to go and participate. Well, they won first place.
Wonderful.
So we got to go to Tallahassee for the state level, which was a wonderful experience. And then we did not win there, but we won first place in the National Maritime Award for what they did.
Great.
So it was really exciting. And that was their thing that they thought about the Titanic, was how it created a lot more safety on the ocean.
When you received the role, when you were given this role and you rehearsed and you tried out, I don't know all the theatrical lingo like you two do, but you did your research on Captain Smith, your deep research on him. And so tell me, when you did his research, hero, there's so much controversy surrounding the Captain Smith and the Titanic. What did you come out with when you're doing your research?
Well, there were several, like you said, there's lots of stories going around, and one of the things that I have found, and most Titanic researchers end up finding out is, sorry, but facts get in the way of your story, right? So one of the more common tropes is that the captain was addled at the time and was acting recklessly and doing things wrong, and then ended up just disappearing and letting things just happen. And none of that is in any way, shape, or form true. He was a wonderful person, a wonderful seaman, multiple decorations for his abilities. He stayed attentive the whole time. He was moving through. He was assisting with loading lifeboats, giving orders to his men. He was on a megaphone calling for the boats to come back.
Okay, now, Don,
yeah,
we're going
that's
to
okay.
have you hold that
I heard
thought.
that.
Music. But we want to hear more about
Yeah.
about Captain.
All right.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. We're back, and we were just talking about the captain on the Titanic.
So yeah, there's a lot of things out there about the captain, about the way he acted that night, but without question, every eyewitness to what was happening, everybody had nothing but praise for him. He was there until the very end. He was helping to load lifeboats. He was giving orders to his men, calling back the lifeboats to come back and pick up more passengers. So that he was much more active. And the one thing that I learned about him, he was the press had taken to calling him the millionaire's captain, because he was very, very, very popular as a captain, and there were groups of people, especially first-class passengers, that followed him from ship to ship to ship to ship. If they knew he was going to be captaining a ship, they sailed only with him and changed their schedules to only sail with the captain. And so that informs my portrayal of him a lot. You see in the movies, like James Cameron's film and all, where he comes across somewhat aloof and all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, you can't have a loyal following for decades if you're that kind of person. So I play him.
Right.
I play him much more friendly, much very social. Somebody commented the other day, I play like if Santa Claus was Captain Smith.
Oh. Well, that's really interesting. I did not know some of that, what you were just saying about him. Like them following him. That's really interesting.
Did he interact with second and third class passengers at any given time?
He did as much as the times allowed, right? So now there's a lot of talk about the way that third class was treated, and again, sometimes that makes a good story, right? And he wasn't necessarily, right. In the film, again, they depict all the gates locked, and that third class is locked down in their little cubby holes, and that wasn't the case. There were occasionally locked gates, but most of the gates were just closed because in that age, like with everything, that people try to equate today's standards and then put that on the standards of the time.
Right.
At that period of time, the Edwardian England, which is, the Titanic came out of England, people understood their place. So if you told somebody this is a third class area, that's a second class area, and you don't go into second class, they didn't try because they understood. You didn't have to have locked gates. They understood that that's where they were supposed to be. Now, at the same time, White Star Line that ran Titanic was famous for its treatment of third class. Third class on Titanic was, third class on Titanic was equal to second class on any other liner in the world. Third class any other liner, third class would have been expected to bring their own food. They would have been expected to bring their own bedding. They would have been given just a mattress and a place to sleep. On White Star, the third class got clean sheets and bedding changed by stewards. They got 3 meals a day, every day. They had actually wash facilities that most third class liners in the world didn't give to third class. They even had 2 bathtubs. Now, granted, that was 2 bathtubs for 714 passengers, but the fact that White Star provided washing facilities and bathtubs to third class was unheard of in any other liner in the world. So they were treated wonderfully. The biggest reason that there was a larger ratio of loss of life in third class than the other classes was that the third class in any ship, even today, third class or lower, lower berths are on either end of the ship, the bow and the stern. So they had a longer way to go to get up to the boat decks. And most of these third class passengers were immigrants that didn't speak English, and all the signage was in English.
Oh.
So there was a lot of confusion as the third class passengers tried to move through those corridors. They couldn't understand the signage to get up there. The stewards did what they could. The stewards did the best job they could to lead the passengers through the hallways, but that contributed mostly to the loss of life in third class.
Very interesting.
There is a name connection to Lake County.
There absolutely is.
And tell us about him.
Okay, so John Jacob Astor, J. Astor IV, was one of the most famous passengers on Titanic who did lose his life. He was the richest passenger on Titanic at the time. His uncle, William, bought 12,000 acres of land over on the St. Johns River. And originally he bought that in 1884, and they called the area Manhattan because they were real estate people. They were all from New York, so he named the area Manhattan and opened the Astor Hotel on the St. Johns River. In 1888, they changed the name of Manhattan, Florida to Astor, Florida. And Astor is just from where we're sitting here about 10, 15 miles thereabouts as crows flies.
Right on the bridge there,
Yeah.
Across the bridge there's a marker, Fort Butler. I guess
Yep.
the area was the old fort there.
Yep, old Fort Butler was
That
there.
was a Seminole War fort that was there. And Volusia, the community of Volusia was on the other side, where the local, they formed battalions for the war between the states, and right across from Fort Butler there. So Jacob Astor, I heard, was kind of brave on the Titanic. Apparently, he
was.
helped out.
He assisted with loading passengers. Many of the first class men did that. They were asked to help out, and they absolutely did. Let me back up just one more for the Astor, Florida connection there. In that, so William died in 1898, and John Jacob got that land, got the hotel. He owned it after 1898, and he had plans to develop it further. There was a lot of that going on here in Central Florida. We know about the hotels over in Eustis, and the Lakeside Inn still there in Mount Dora. But after John Jacob died, his son William decided he didn't want to pursue the land down here, and they ended up selling it off to the Duluth land company.
Maintained the name, though.
But they maintained the name of Astor.
So basically, the Titanic ended that resort from
It did.
being built.
It did. It had a huge impact on the development of that area. If John Jacob had survived, who knows what might have ended up happening over
Been
there.
a lot different, I'm sure.
And his wife was pregnant. I think it was a few months later when the child was born.
This was his second wife, Madeline. This was a bit of a scandal at the time. So John Jacob had been married before, and he divorced his first wife to take up with his at the time 17-year-old mistress. Got married at 18, but that scandal caused them to go overseas. And so actually he left New York to go travel in Europe with Madeline after they got married till, if you will, the furor died down a bit. And he was actually returning to New York after spending 3 months in Egypt with Madeline, and Madeline was pregnant at the time. So Madeline did survive and went on to have the baby.
Wasn't Molly Brown one of their guests to travel with them?
Yes, Molly did travel with the Astors for part of their trip. Molly was a very interesting character. She was very outgoing. Now she was not quite as boisterous as she's portrayed in the movies. Kathy Bates was wonderful as the character, and Debbie Reynolds, of course, in The Unsinkable Molly Brown. But that they stretch it just a little bit there. But Molly, at the same time, Margaret, she was called. She was never called Molly to her face, and never spoken about as Molly until many years later. But Margaret was a very outgoing, very civic-minded person, right? So she did a lot on board the ship at the time. But yes, she had spent some time with the Astors in Egypt before they came back on, and they got on the Titanic to come back. So,
legend, fact, the band playing there.
Fact.
It is fact.
Fact.
Okay.
All the witnesses spoke about the band playing right till the end. That was Mr. Hartley, William Hartley, and the band. There is some discussion or disagreement on what the last song was. Of course, "Nearer, My God, to Thee" is what most people know. But there were also many people who reported hearing the song "Autumn," which was also a popular song at the time, being played. But everybody agreed that the band played right up until the end. It's interesting about that group is they were not an official band. In fact, 3 of the members had only met the rest of them as they got on board the Titanic.
Oh.
They were house bands, if you will, for lots of different liners, and they would pretty much go wherever the contracts were. And Titanic was the only ship sailing across at that time because of the coal strike. So they were looking for the paycheck, and so they got together and they played together. And everybody knew the standards. There was a songbook. There was an official White Star songbook, so you would just study and play out of the songbook. But this remarkably, they all at the end did that selfless act of keeping the passengers calm and playing literally until the ship went under.
It's kind of fascinating because it's still one of the most fascinating. There's legends still that come of who were the villains, who were the heroes. You wonder why all the boats. For an experienced crew, was it their fault that all these boats didn't get properly filled? There's so many legends that come out of the Titanic.
One of the saddest things,
Yeah.
I think, out of the whole thing that we look at is the fact that we could have had more live.
Well, so and that's another one of those things where we base that on today's standards. But at the time, actually, Titanic had more boats than it was legally required to have. At the time, a boat was rated, the lifeboat count was rated on the tonnage of the ship, not the amount of passengers, the size of the ship.
Oh, wow.
So it was only actually required to have 16, and they had 20. They had the 16 full-size lifeboats, and then they had the 4 collapsibles, which could hold 50 or 6. The standard lifeboat held 70 to 75. The collapsibles, another 50. So there were several contributing factors to the lifeboats going out half full. One was that nobody could believe the ship was going to sink, right? And all the passengers on board, they're looking at this little tiny wooden boat and saying, "Get in this boat and we're going to put you down in the ocean." And they're like, "I'm on this big thing that's supposed to be the safest thing afloat. Why would I get in that boat?" So there were countless stories of people being begged, "You please get in this boat." But because you're launching multiple boats, you had to launch 2 from each set of davits, the holders for the boats. You had to get that first boat in the water so you could bring the second boat up and start loading it. So it got to a point where time they didn't have enough time. It's like, this boat has got to get out of the way. We've got to get another boat up here and get it loaded. And there wasn't time to get everybody in there because people were not getting into the boats. That people were screaming and hollering, "Get in these boats." Thomas Andrews, the designer of the ship, was heard begging people, "You can't pick and choose your boat. Please get in." And people just weren't doing it because they didn't believe until it became very, very obvious. They didn't believe that Titanic itself could actually sink, and they thought they were safer on board.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, and you know what another sad thing is? After the
We're
break.
going to have to hold that thought. This is really interesting. We're so glad to have you today, Don.
Thank you.
We'll be right back.
I want to get into the question I'm going to get into is,
Oh, I know it's going so fast. Well, this is really interesting. So today we have Don Campbell, if you're just tuning in, and he is telling us about the history of the Titanic. And I just want to remind our viewers, if you have a question or a comment, please call in. We love it when we have a caller. Our number is 352-315-1410 or 1410. Yeah, y'all call in and ask a question if you like.
absolutely. We were talking about the lifeboat situation, and another sad point that I'd like you to talk about is there was a boat that they were trying to signal that was so close.
The Californian.
The California. Could you tell us about that?
So the Californian had been stopped in the ice pack earlier in the evening, and had radioed out the positions of the ice to the other ships. And when Titanic, well, another one of those things where there were a lot of things that led up to it, right? So the Titanic was equipped with a wireless called the Marconi wireless, and so that was a newer innovation at the time. But the Marconi was not run by White Star Line; it was run by the Marconi company, and they were private employees on the Titanic. Their job was to send out and receive passenger messages. They weren't, that they happened to get ship-to-ship communications was just a side note. Their emphasis, their job was to send and receive passenger messages. The Marconi on the Titanic had broken down, and it was supposed to be just left broken because Marconi did not want the operators fixing it. But the two operators, Phillips and McBride, wonderful people. Jack Phillips stayed up all night and fixed the Marconi, got it working that morning. But at that time, they had a huge backlog of messages. So they were trying to catch up on messages for the passengers. They received a warning from the Californian, they were trying to get a message from the Californian. They had the radio turned up, the sensitivity turned up, so they could get all these messages out. So when the Californian's operator opened up a "Hey, I need to tell you something," it basically blew the headphones off of Jack Phillips, and he kind of snapped back. Not now. I've got to get these messages out. And so the Californian's operator basically kind of got in a little tiff about it and said, "Fine, I'm done. It's the end of my shift." Shut off his radio and went to bed. So the Californian never received any of the messages that about 20 minutes later, Titanic started sending out asking for help.
How far was Californian away?
It was, so distance-wise, 10, 15 miles thereabouts, right? Now, there is still, honest debate whether they could have, even that close, gotten to Titanic in time. They would have had to fire up their boilers because they were at a dead stop. So they would have had to fire up their boilers and then make their way through the ice flow that they were in to try to get to Titanic in time. So there's a question on whether they could have been effective anyway, but they never got a chance. Titanic did fire off flares to try and signal the ship. This was reported and recorded and came up in the inquiries afterwards that they did see the flares, but they were not sure if they were distress calls because they were white flares. They thought they were maybe just signaling another ship, or maybe they were party flares being sent off. It really wasn't clear. And since they could not get any other confirmation, they weren't. Titanic was not responding to a Morse lamp that was being flashed. And the radios were silent, of course. So that California never came to help. But yes, it was there. People on the Titanic could see the Californian's lights and kept wondering, why aren't they coming?
Did the Californian captain get into trouble?
Well, yeah. I mean, so that came out in the inquiries. He was, and and yeah, kind of like everybody, there's you look for villains in a story, right? I don't know that. So he was cleared by the Admiralty that he did everything he was supposed to do. Of course, now we'd always say, well, you could have done more. It's like, well, but could he?
Feedback is easy.
Yeah, exactly.
We
Oh,
have
yeah.
sites.
We have 112 years of armchair quarterbacking going on the
Yeah.
Titanic right now.
Right.
Mr. Marconi himself was supposed to be on the Titanic, wasn't he?
Well, he talked about
Going on.
going,
Yeah.
whether he would actually have gone or not was.
Now, there's another main character of this whole story you wanted to talk about.
J. Bruce Ismay. Well, if you talk about someone who has been made the villain in this story, it was J. Bruce Ismay. And again, sorry for facts getting in the way here, but one of the things out there is that he was pushing for Titanic to set a speed record and go faster, go faster, go faster. First off, Titanic was incapable of setting a speed record. Everybody knew it. Everybody in the White Star Line knew it. All the other ships in the world knew it. White Star Line had given up the speed race years ago. Cunard Line, which operates still today, by the way, as Carnival. Cunard Line were the ones who were fast. So White Star, they were saying, no, we'll get you across in luxury.
I was going to say that wasn't their focus.
Yeah, exactly. So there's one person, and Mrs. Miles in the inquiries said she overheard Ismay pushing the captain to light the last 5 boilers and get this thing going. It was never done. So even if he suggested to the captain to do that, the captain never did it. So they weren't traveling too fast. And then of course, Ismay survived because he got into one of the boats. But what people miss in that story was all of the witnesses, Ismay spent the entire night going from boat to boat to boat, loading boats. He was seen all over the deck. Witnesses had him at every lifeboat station during the entire night. And he was at the very last lifeboat to be launched, Collapsible Sea, which he almost exclusively loaded with third-class women and children. At that point, on that side of the boat, everybody else was gone. He loaded the last passengers in view. He called out, any more passengers, any more up, anybody else. And when no one responded and no one came forward, he stepped into the boat because there was an open seat there.
And who could really blame him for that?
Exactly. If he had gone down with the ship, he would have been blamed, and he survived, and he was blamed, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that played into that is he and William Randolph Hearst, newspaper editor, famous for creating the Yellow Press, right? Hearst and Ismay had a long-standing feud because of a perceived slight that Ismay had given to Hearst years and years before. So William Randolph Hearst made it his mission in life to smear Ismay in the press as much as he possibly could. Gave him the nickname of J. Brute Ismay, claimed that he dressed in women's clothes to get into the boat, claimed that he took the seat of other people, and nothing could have been further from the truth. And afterwards, he was absolutely devastated by this, as you can imagine.
Sure.
He left White Star Line shortly after, gave away all of his money to charity, and lived a life of seclusion afterwards.
Wow. Wasn't there a couple where the wife, they were famous, weren't they?
The Strausses.
The Strausses.
Ida and
There you
Isidore
go.
Strauss, right?
Yeah.
So they actually were co-owners of Macy's. Isidore owned Macy's at the time. Ida got into the boat when she found out that Isidore was not going to get into the boat because it was women and children. Women and children first was never a rule. It was just an accepted practice, right? She said, no, I'm not leaving without you. We've been together, they were both in their 60s at the time. Says, I haven't spent all these years with you to go down without or to live without you. She got back out of the boat and stood on deck with him. Now in the movie, they are portrayed as the couple that lays down in the bed
Right.
together, and so they did not. They were out. They were on deck. They were last seen standing on the deck holding hands when the lifeboat went away. But yes, so she got in and then got back out again when she realized that they would be separated.
Yeah, the Strasses are a great story. So outside of the captain, is there a particular favorite story that comes out of the Titanic story, the saga of the Titanic that sticks with you the most?
Only about 1,476.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Is that how many passengers there were?
That's how many passengers perished.
Perished.
Yes, 1,476.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
a good number.
So,
Good to know.
yeah. Yeah, 718 survived.
Survived. Okay. Very
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
Very good.
There are so many. There's so many fascinating stories in all of that, and or even bits of stories. I talked about Dorothy Gibson before. She's one of the characters that we portray in the dinner show. Very famous silent film actress. She had done a lot of films for the Studio Eclair in France, and was on her way back to America to actually try and do Broadway, and start doing some films in America. She actually starred, her last film was called Saved from the Titanic, and she began filming that 5 days after the sinking and wore the actual dress that she was rescued in.
Wow, that's very interesting.
Yeah, but it proved to be too much for her, and she ended up retiring. But that film was released 30 days after the sinking. It was the first.
Who are the characters that are portrayed in your dinner show? Which characters are
Captain Smith,
Captain Smith.
Dorothy Gibson, Margaret Brown, Thomas Andrews, and J. Bruce Ismay, and then Violet Jessup. You mentioned Violet. Now, at the time, you said she was a nurse, right? So she did end up being a nurse later in life. At the time, she was one of the stewards. So
okay.
Violet Jessup was.
So she actually worked on the ship.
She worked on the ship. She actually worked on several ships, and she had several ships sink under her. She was on Britannic when Britannic was, which is sister ship to Titanic. When it sank, she was there. She had been on she had been on several ships, and she continued. She ended up being 45 years at sea, even with all those tragedies. And yes, did end up being a nurse.
That's very interesting. I didn't know she was working on the ship.
Yep.
And Mr. Andrews,
Thomas Andrews. He was the architect.
was the architect of the Titanic.
Right. So he worked for Harland and Wolff. Harland and Wolff was the shipyard that built Titanic. In fact, Harland and Wolff had built all of the White Star ships since the 1850s. He was the head architect. He was there with a group of 9 men called the Guarantee Group, and their job was to take notes on the ship for the next one being built. They had already laid the keel for the third ship, what would become Britannic. They had already laid the keel for it. So they were on Titanic taking notes and saying, okay, well, we can make a change here, we can make a change there, we can add a little more room here or upgrade this thing. And that was, so he was on Titanic and had all the plans for Titanic. In fact, he had many of the original plans, and they ended up going down with Titanic, which makes it pretty fun for the researchers today.
Well, that's what I
because
was
we
gonna
don't
ask
have,
you.
there is no complete set of plans for Titanic. However, I have to put in a plug here for some wonderful researchers, Matt DeWinkler and James Panka and the team at Titanic Honor and Glory. You can look them up on the internet, Titanic Honor and Glory. They have the most complete set of plans that they have created from all of the notes and research for Titanic. And they also have just incredible true to life walkthroughs of all areas of the Titanic. If you want to see what that ship looked like in real life at the time, Titanic Honor and Glory is the closest you're ever going to get to it.
Well, it's too bad Mr. Andrews didn't pass his notes on to somebody that was going into a lifeboat.
Yeah.
I know.
You know?
No, there's lots
I
of things.
guess that was
The
the
ship's
last thing on his mind.
Well, yeah, honestly, because he was loading the lifeboats. Yeah, and you can say the same thing about the ship's log never made it into a lifeboat either. That would have been wonderful reference today for the researchers. But there's still a lot of work going on. There's still current work. RMST, the company that I work for, just completed an expedition not even 2 weeks ago down to the site with remote operated vehicles. It was not a manned expedition this time, but it is the most advanced photographing and mapping ever done on the site. It will be a little bit before we start seeing the results of that because it takes a while to do the processing on those photography. But they just spend a month with 65K resolution cameras, 65 megapixel cameras, stereo cameras. It's going to be the pictures and the detail and the data we're going to get out of this is just going to be phenomenal.
And the museum itself, I'll tell you, I don't know if you've been there, Kelly. The museum is incredible. It's what actually is one of the finest museums there is. Tell us just a little bit about some of the things you would see in the museum. Obviously, many of the artifacts are real from the Titanic.
Yeah, the majority of it. There's over 140 recovered, and I'm going to get to work and get yelled at because I'm sure I have that number wrong. But
oh my goodness! Thank you so much
things,
for coming, Don Campbell. And
absolutely.
Bob Grenier, he's running for mayor, and he's a wonderful person. He loves his city, and so we're glad to have you too, Bob.
Yes.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right, we'll see you next week. Have a great week, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you guys for having me.